Hi, welcome to Memory Chips Podcast. I am Ann Wyszynski, and I have a collection of potato chip bags from around the world. And every so often, I go through this collection, and a certain bag or bags will bring up memories of people, places, ideas, and I really want to share these with you. So if you please subscribe, you will never miss a bag. I had reservations about moving back to the U.S. from abroad, especially around moving to rural West Virginia. Even though my family is here and I have some amazing friends, I was really afraid that my unorthodox way of looking at things would leave me feeling like a fish out of water. And I have to admit that my fears have largely been justified, and I feel most of the time like I'm totally out of sync with the prevailing attitudes of the area. But I can console myself with the knowledge that people like Dr. John Flower live here. John and his wife Pam, Dr. Pam Leonard, my brother-in-law Marty Fair, and a whole gang of incredible artisans and doers moved a house from Yunnan province in China to Jefferson County, West Virginia. Why? Well, first, you'd have to know John Flower. For one thing, this is him singing and playing stand-up bass with the bluegrass band McGraw Gap. And yes, he is singing the traditional Chinese folk song Kong Ding in Mandarin. As the director of the Sidwell Friends School's Chinese Studies program, John works tirelessly to meld his lifelong scholarship of all things Chinese with his solid footing in the folk traditions of his native U.S. He also has a thing or two to say about the significance of potato chip flavors in the larger scheme of world diplomacy. So, here we go.
Who is your vegetable?
And what do you think?
Who is your vegetable? I think it's a slogan for Lay's.
Who is your vegetable?
And Lay's has a great, what I think is really interesting is a lot of these corporations, they get really excellent translations. So Lay's is 乐事, which means happy affairs.
So do you think that Who is your vegetable is a contest of some sort? Or that's just their slogan for Lay's?
I think it's their slogan.
Can you tell me what the flavor of that bag is?
This particular bag is spicy green peppercorn fish flavor.
Okay. But
what it really is that green peppercorn is huajiao.
So that's the Sichuan pepper.
Yeah.
And then the one below it that's also Lay's that also, I think it also says Who is your vegetable? What's that flavor?
Ooh, this is also pepper and chicken. 小公鸡味. Little rooster flavor.
Little rooster flavor. Okay. One of the things that I was interested in talking about is seems interesting to me that they would like to put these regional flavors and dishes so that people can identify with them.
I think that's right. It looks like a lot of them are, as you said, regional dishes, and Sichuan seems to be really, really popular because it's such an identifiable, totally distinctive, flavor.
Yeah.
Hot and stimulating, intense and stimulating, as the bag here says. Intense and stimulating. But yeah, you're right. They're like dishes. They're not flavors like we would think of flavors. They're like dishes.
Yeah.
And they evoke dishes.
Yeah.
So if you look at this one, the one that is the fish flavored one. Those are green huajiao. Very numb, spicy stuff. Yeah. Very, very, and very associated with, especially Sichuan cuisine. And then here, this one is hot pot, right? So there's the hot pot.
Yeah. That's also numb. And then it's translated as numb and spicy.
Numb and spicy with 3 peppers.
3 peppers, okay. So do you think, well, actually, this is kind of interesting. Do you think that in China, with Chinese consumers, that there's a element of machismo in eating hot and spicy things like there is here? You know how they have hot pepper, everything is like badass, habanero, ass burner, whatever it is that they have, and there's like this machismo of like how hot you can handle it. Do you think that exists in
totally
China? You do?
Yeah, so there's a saying, right? They have a saying for everything, but they say, most people are afraid of hot, pa la. But people from like Hunan, they bu pa la, means I'm not afraid of la, of hot and spicy. But people from Sichuan, they pa bu la, which means they're afraid that it's not going to be spicy. Right? So they it sounds good in Chinese where they say.
Right. I mean, the reason why I'm asking about that is I'm trying to sort of segue into talking about the folk house, the China folk house, and how it's an exchange between cultures, folk cultures. So can you tell me a little bit, would you mind talking about the folk house and tell me what your mission is and a little bit of the history of it?
Yeah. The folk house, the China folk house is like a traditional timber frame farmhouse from southwest China, from Yunnan province, that was going to be flooded by a dam built on the Mekong River. And so we decided to study the house and its community and then make a record of it, document it virtually. And at the end of that process, we dismantled it and shipped it here to America to translate the landscape, right? To build that house from the Mekong River and the Himalayas to the Shenandoah River and the Blue Ridge, right? Yeah. And so we're rebuilding it, and we're going to make it a cultural exchange center and a craft school, and celebrate the local knowledge of the place that it came from, but have it relocated, give the house a new home, but also in a rural area, that has its own craft traditions and its own local knowledge. So it's kind of a physical landscape translation project. Yeah. Which I think makes it very much like a bag of potato chips. Well, I'm looking here at chicken flavor. And it's not just chicken flavor, but it's French chicken flavor, right? The flavors have a place, it's about place. Yeah. The same thing with the hot stuff, the mala. Well, that's like Sichuan, right? And this is not just chicken flavor; it's French chicken flavor. Yeah. So it's like places have their own distinct flavor, and that's what they're trying to capture in this bag. Right. But interestingly, right, it's in Chinese, right? And it's French chicken. And then there's another bag in here where they talk about the whole history of the potato chip.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I found very interesting.
Which is the same history of the potato chip that we know, which is that one about how, they say that they say that it was invented as a joke, right? Or maybe that's just the translation of it. But it was invented, according to them, it's the same story that we had talked about in our reenactment of the history of the potato chip. Yeah. Where there was this George Speck or George Crumb in New York. And he was frustrated with a patron that kept sending back his potatoes and wanting them crispier, and then he ended up with a potato chip. So they retell that story on the back of one of these bags. I don't remember which one it is. It was one of those Ridge ones.
Yeah, in fact, it's a Ridge one, which is a Chinese brand. And it's like they're explaining potato chips to a Chinese audience. And, people have domesticated the potato for over 6,000 years. Wow. And then in 1853, you have the whole story about the making of the chip. So it's kind of like the potato chip is an international commodity. Yeah. It's international. It's crossing national boundaries, and yet it's deeply tied to local place. Yeah. Right. It's always got a place flavor. Right. So so that's kind of like, I mean, the folk house is also, it went halfway around the world. It's a Chinese house that was rebuilt by West Virginia timber framers. Right? It's got that international aspect, but it's deeply located, uniquely located in like 2 places.
Yeah.
So I kind of see that as an interesting parallel with the potato chip. And then, it's kind of interesting that the ones that are most local flavored Chinese are done by Lay's.
It's American, right?
If I was going to ask that question of anyone, Anne, I think I would ask it of you.
I think it's owned by Pepsi. So you move the folk house here, and since you moved it here, you've had a number of camps, right, and to rebuild it.
Yeah.
So it was kept in. You kept it until it was fumigated and there's no bugs in it or whatever else it was.
That was important as being a transnational commodity.
Right, exactly.
Just as I'm sure all these potato chips are.
Yes, exactly. I kept them in quarantine for many years. In order to put it back up, you started immediately. You didn't just assemble it. You started it with students and volunteers and people that were interested in it. They are in just reassembling it. In the process of putting it up, you're accomplishing your mission of informing people or exposing people to this folk tradition from this particular place. I didn't know until I read that there was 3 different like ethnic influences in the China house. So
it's a fascinating hybrid that way. It's like the people are ethnically Tibetan. They would speak Tibetan in the home, but they were Catholics because they had been converted at the end of the 19th century in this community. About 80, maybe 75, 80% of the community was Catholic. The others were Tibetan Buddhist. But then there are also people, the former headman of this area, the Tusa, the chief, was of the Naxi ethnicity. And they tend to be rice farmers rather than herders, but this is right on that kind of cultural and sort of biological cusp, And then there are Lisu people, and then there are Bai people who are the carpenters who made it. So you have Bai carpenters building a house for Tibetan Catholics using a Naxi style. And then to make it even more interesting, the guy who built it said, I really like the way the Han Chinese open their courtyards. I'm going to do that. So it's got a Han courtyard structure. Yeah. And so it's a lot of flavors, right, mixed together to create this sort of unique and yet very typical of that area kind of architecture. And the thing is that the kids and the volunteers rebuilding it, you get to understand something at a much deeper level when you're actually doing it.
Right.
So when the timber framers came out, we kind of figured, well, these guys, they build post and beam stuff all the time. And we had marked all the posts and beams and how they, and I'll be darned if it didn't take them hours. They kept looking at it and going, that beam definitely goes into that post. But we have no idea how it actually fits together. And they kept looking at it. And finally, they figured out that it had to come in at one precise angle, like a 15-degree angle off from perpendicular. And then it just slid in, and then it as it moved back up together, it tightened everything. It all came into place. So that was like the only way they could understand that. And that was also related to things like the earthquake propensity in this part of the world and stuff like that. But the only way they could ever understand that, you couldn't really explain it. Like, I'm sure people listening to this can't really understand, but if they did it, they would understand.
Right.
Just like if you looked at a potato chip and it said lobster and cheese, as this one here does, you'd be like, what would that possibly? The only way to know is to just open it up and go in there and start tasting.
Digging around. Yeah. Where does cuisine? Where does food come in? Does it come in your mission? Yeah.
Yeah. So the folk house it'll be three things. One is it's going to be a craft school, and clearly, food ways, that's a fundamental craft.
Right.
It's also going to be a place for cultural exchange, and we'll have opportunities for people to kind of experience Chinese culture by coming out, having dinner, a big 8-bowl dinner at the tables set out in the courtyard, just like a big wedding,
Yeah.
And then the other
thing is going to be at like 8:00 in the morning, like a Chinese wedding.
all for days, and then it'll be like a living museum where you can come and interact with the exhibits, and we have it kind of organized so that each room of the house is a different theme related to how it was used originally, and of course, the kitchen will be a major site in the museum. One of the things we work with a wonderful woman who is a folklorist. She's Tibetan, Kamo. She's from the Amdo region of Tibet, and she actually had the kids make momo, which are dumplings, and have them make tokpa, which is a kind of noodle soup. So we've already started to do that kind of thing using woks, the big outdoor woks. But they're wonderful chefs in the D.C. area. I mean, there's one in particular, famous chef Peter Chang.
Oh, of course.
And we would give anything, if you're listening, Peter. We would do anything to have him come out, and he's actually been very, very sweet and nice to us, giving us advice, and we're hoping that we can get some great Chinese chefs to come out and do some this would be real country cooking.
Right.
Because we're going to have, we got woks and the traditional kind that have the bellows built in. Mm-hmm. So we're going to cook over a fire. We have a little wok nook that we're building into the wok nook.
Yeah. Sounds like Inuit.
But one of those two wok masonry stove that's got the open fire and
firewood underneath.
Yeah, so I anticipate we're going to do a lot of cooking, and then the other thing about it, of course, is that we're going to have gardens.
Right, the gardens.
Yeah, the gardens that's going to be huge. We're going to have an intensive vegetable garden, an ethnobotany garden that will actually show the medicinal plants and other sort of ways of using the native plants. That'll be showcased in one garden, and then a kind of landscape garden with, rocks and pagodas and pavilions.
Moon gate.
Yes, moon gate. So it'll be so the landscape garden. But we're really excited about the vegetable garden.
Yeah.
And then I don't want to bring this back too close to your turf, but this part of the world, of course, is famous for the potato. Because the mountain potatoes that you get in the areas going up towards the grassland, like potatoes, peas, barley, that's very Tibetan cuisine. And if you think about it, the home place of the potato in Peru, right, is very similar to the climatic conditions that you have in this part of the Himalayas. So their potatoes are delicious. They're wonderful. Now, I've never had potato chips made out of them.
Well,
but
that could be a thing.
Yeah.
So obviously things aren't great between, in the U.S. and China, and people have a little bit of resistance towards this idea of, China. And I don't know if you are feeling any. I mean, you're not like all over the place with the China, the folk house. So I mean, it's not like, my next door neighbors know about it or anything like that, and they're mad that there's this Chinese house, but. Do you think that doing food diplomacy is a way to knock down, like diminish the animosity between?
Yeah.
What you do?
Yeah, I do.
You think? Okay.
So I happened to be leafing through the bags, and I noticed Kyushu seaweed, right?
Yeah. Japanese.
Jojo. So Japan, but. And of course, the history between Japan and China, shall we say, is rather unfortunate and fraught.
Yes.
Far more than our relations ever could be. And yet, here they're putting that flavor, but I noticed they're not saying Japanese flavored,
No.
right?
No.
Like we wouldn't. So the thing that's interesting that you started pointing out is that it's about place.
Yeah.
Japan isn't a place. Japan is a nation state, right? It's an imagined political entity, and governments. Japan is a government. China is a government,
Yeah.
right? That's where there's always going to be these frictions and problems.
Right.
People to people, place to place, that breaks through all that, right? So here they're not. This is a Japanese flavored. It's Kyushu,
Seaweed.
right?
Yeah.
Seaweed flavor.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a way in which, the guys from the Timber Framer Guild, they said, you got to bring our brothers over, the people who made this house. We want to talk with them. So it's people to people. That'll definitely transcend these what I hope are short-lived, but political. People aren't political. People are human. And food, and they all got to eat, and they all love. Who doesn't love to experience another culture through its food?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that when I think it was the first time that I was training in China in Hebei. I asked, I can't remember. They were asking me what kind of food, like what kind of food do you like? They were asking me like what I like to eat, and of course I said, oh, Chinese food is great, but this was in the north. It's and the food, it was amazing. And I was saying, oh, I love dumplings, and I love Chinese food. And they're like, well, what other food? They were kind of goading me. They're like, do you like American food? And I'm like, I don't really know what American. I guess so. I was like, and then they were like, do you like fish, sushi? I think they asked me if I liked sushi. I was like, yeah. And they said, do you like Japanese food? And I said, yeah, I love Japanese food. I mean, knowing the thing, and they're like, disgusting. Then everybody that was there in that conversation was like, oh, horrible. Japanese food is horrible. And they just started going off about Japanese food. And obviously it was like, I don't even know if they've even had it. And somebody said, they eat with their hands.
But I'll bet if any of them had Japanese food,
yeah,
they wouldn't do that.
Right.
I mean, we fear and hate what we don't understand. Right. But it's like those political divisions and the sort of nation state kind of hatreds. They can be pushed down to apply to stuff like food.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. From the top down, but from the bottom up, it doesn't work that way. Right.
No.
From the bottom up, it doesn't work that way.
No.
When you go to a Sichuan restaurant, you don't go, oh, Chinese food, I hate the Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Whatever. Oh, coronavirus and stuff. You're not thinking. You're not thinking that.
Yeah. No.
You're not thinking that. You'll think that when you're reading the newspaper, or watching
right.
Fox News or something. But if you're actually dealing with the people, or dealing with their food or something that can be understood and experienced. The Chinese have a great word for experience. I mean, 体会. It means body able. To actually bodily experience something. Yeah. That always transcends that petty stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what you're doing with the folk house, with the programming and everything, is to give that experiential personal experience. So we're talking about the food, and I just wanted to end by so if the folk house were to make that potato chip flavor, so China folk house brand potato chips, what flavor do you think it would be? Like, what do you think embodies this idea of what you're trying to do at the folk house?
Okay. I'm gonna make it mala, right? It's gonna
spicy.
It's gonna be numbing, spicy. That's not just Sichuan. That's Southwest China.
Okay.
Right, but it's country, right? So it's got to be country, right? So I would have it mala, and then to make it a dish, la ro, mala la ro, which would be smoked ham with numb and hot spice. That's what I would do.
So the ham is a nod to
the ham is a nod to the famous ham of Yunnan province, right, where the house is from. But it's also like the way that they cook is that you fire up the wok and you hang the meat. Every house, the word for home in Chinese is a pig with a roof over it. Because home is where the hog is. Okay? And so every family has to have a pig. If you don't have a pig, it's not just that you don't have meat. It's that you don't have that essential processing agent that the house, right? You have the pig there. You take your agricultural waste and you feed it to the pig, and the pig creates manure, because pigs traditionally were important as fertilizer. They produced fertilizer, and then that would go to make food, and that kind of made the whole cycle happen. Mm-hmm. So to have a hog, you would be, if you were wealthy and prosperous, at the new year or before the new year, you would have a hog killing, just like we have hog killings in rural Virginia, West Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. And then you would take that hog and you would hang it up above the wok where all the processing is happening, right? And the smoke cures it. And so they have smoked ham, just like we have smoked ham. So I think that's a kind of cultural universal, in a way, of a sort of smallholder agricultural, economies. Yeah. And then you add this special, distinct local spice. So it's got the universal and it's got the particular. I think it's going to be huge.
Are you listening, Route 11? Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions or comments about what you heard today, please post them to the review section of your podcast player. So if you use Apple Podcasts, you click on the show thumbnail and scroll down to leave a review. And then whatever happens after that is up to you. But hopefully it's nice. You can also leave posts on Instagram at Memory Chips Podcast.